But I always did the calculations. As an education reporter in this area, I brought a fairly high level of expertise and value. As an activist, I'd be another warm body with a sign. So I stuck with it. And this congregation did give me a way to talk about and engage with important issues in a safe setting. It is generally understood that reporters have a right to practice a religion. You don't keep a Catholic reporter from covering the news just because the Pope has taken a stand on it. So as a member of this congregation, I could do things like march in Charlotte's very first Pride Parade in the 90s, when that was really a pretty big deal, or engage in anti-racism work. I stuck with it until I turned 65 and retired in August of 2024. And I think I shocked a lot of people by making a clean break. I did not know what I wanted to do, but it wasn't going to be journalism. I didn't have plans to write a book or travel the world or run a marathon. I told everybody I'm just going to take a deep breath and see what life has in store for me. And I did pretty well at that for a few months. I got outside more, I connected with more friends. But a couple of months after I retired, there was an election. And a couple of months after that, there was an inauguration. And all of a sudden, this country was going through changes that I could not have imagined. And I didn't have to sit on the sidelines anymore. But my path to activism seemed obvious. I know most of the activists and advocates in Charlotte, including some of you here in this congregation. I actually live in Gaston County. Carrie and I bought a house there after the Observer hired me for its Gastonia Bureau in 1987, and we stayed put. But my life had always been focused in Charlotte. So I figured I'd just keep crossing the river, follow the lead of my amazing friends and associates, and be that warm body with a sign. But after I joined the Indivisible Charlotte Facebook group, I kept seeing posts from people in Gaston County saying, we feel isolated over here and we want something like that here. If you are new to this area, Gaston County is the first county west of Charlotte. It grew up around textile mills. It has a blue-collar reputation and a very red voting history, but it's also growing and changing. So when I reflected on what I had really done in my career, I felt like I was a community builder and a storyteller. And I'd stuck around long enough and genuinely cared about the people I covered that quite a few people around the region felt like they could trust me. So I decided that maybe those skills would be something that would help me, in the words of the Unitarian Universalist Association, meet the moment. So I posted on Indivisible Charlotte Facebook page, inviting people who wanted to think about doing something in Gaston County to come hang out at our Belmont bookshop. And maybe a dozen or so of us got together, and out of that, we eventually organized an interest meeting in Mount Holly that drew about 50 people. And I introduced myself to that group and said, if you've heard my voice on NPR, you probably think I know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to resisting an authoritarian regime, I don't have a clue. And I don't think most of us do. I said there were only two things I felt pretty sure about. One was that it was better to do something than to do nothing. And two was that it was better to do it together than to be alone. So we decided to plunge in together and do something. And we have. Not quite a year later, Indivisible Gaston is doing street corner protests and making our presence known in local government and turning out hundreds of people for No Kings events. Sometimes all of us on the leadership team have kind of become like a family, and we look at each other and go, a year ago, most of us didn't know each other, and we never imagined doing the things that we're doing now. So I'm not going to go through all the practical things I had to learn about organizing and teamwork, but let me talk about the things that go to the point of living my values. First, I try to remember what Jay told us about defining our religious beliefs. Don't spend all your time telling us what you're against. That lets somebody else set the agenda for you. Figure out what you stand for. And that is kind of hard because there is so much to be against right now. You kind of want to spend all day, every day screaming no to the latest outrages that are coming through your newsfeed. But one thing that really helped, I mentioned that most of us on our leadership team did not know each other. But one smart thing I did was recruit Peg and Joe Argent, who are fellow Gaston County Unitarian Universalists and longtime friends. And Peg was the one who told us at a certain point, you know, y'all have been just jumping in and doing stuff. Maybe we should pull up and define our vision and our mission and our core beliefs. And I won't go through the whole long thing, but we decided if you had to boil it down to something that could be on a banner, it would be democracy, diversity, and decency. So I try to remember that, whether I'm writing a statement or making a sign, don't make it all no, put some yes in there. Second, there's this surreal situation that I think we're all familiar with, where we understand that we're dealing with literally life and death matters, but our own lives haven't changed all that much. So there's this weird juggling act where we're trying to be joyous and positive and be prepared for things to get ugly. So we have not had anything horrible happen in Gaston County, but our crew did have a real sense that this could get serious after the murder of Charlie Kirk. And as you recall, before there was any evidence, the president blamed anti-MAGA leftists and fanned the flames of vengeance. The internet was going crazy. And we were the most visible leftists in Gaston County, which is packed full of Charlie Kirk fans. We had a demonstration planned for the Saturday after the shooting, and we thought about calling it off. But Peg and I kind of led the charge to go ahead. And it was interesting that the two UUs had kind of independently come to the same conclusion, which is that, of course, Charlie Kirk's murder was tragic and outrageous, but no more so than all of the violence of all kinds that plays out in America so often. And we didn't want to fan the narrative that he was a unique American martyr. And yes, there was an increased risk that somebody would target us. But we also knew that Trump was looking for opportunities to crack down on dissent. And we wanted to practice stepping up rather than stepping back. So if you read my Facebook post, a lot of you know what happened next. We got out there on that Saturday and we had a bigger than usual crowd, and we had let our people know, stay home if you don't feel safe. There's no shame in that. But if you're willing to send a message that we condemn all violence and that we still stand for democracy and decency, turn up and remember to be nonviolent no matter what happens. So we had 40 minutes of regular demonstration, and then three guys walked up, three big old burly white guys. One of them has on his patriotic tank top and a big Trump flag. One of them's just standing behind him with his arms folded. And one of them comes up from behind and is, obviously ready to video whatever happens next and stream it. And it was scary for a moment when we thought they might be the first of many, but it kind of turned out it was just them. And Black man came up and stood there, and one of our members came over and kind of wanted to heckle him. And those of us who were corner captains said, no, step back, they're not harassing us, we're not harassing them. They do have a right to be here. So we kind of had this awkward coexistence, made a little bit of small talk, and the time was up and everybody went on about their way. And I posted about it on Facebook. And that evening I got a message from a guy named Josh, who introduced himself as the guy with the Trump flag. And he wanted me to know that they were angry and upset when they came and expected us to be horrible. And in fact, we were decent to them. Since then, Josh and I have exchanged a lot of messages on Facebook. We had one long in-person breakfast. And honestly, we have kind of given up on politics because we just don't see eye to eye on everything. But we do see each other as human. So that kind of brings me to the third challenge of this new life. How do I relate to people who strongly disagree with me now that I don't have to keep quiet and neutral? And this kind of ties in for me. One of the challenges of Unitarian Universalism has always been the universalist part, because, inherent worth and dignity of all people. But all people. And I've never literally believed in hell that it's just some people that deserve eternal damnation. I've never quite resolved that. One of the things I learned from all those years in journalism was that if you just listen without arguing and passing judgment, you do learn a lot. And with most people, you do find some common ground. For me and Josh, it's food, restaurants. So that's the approach that I followed with people who voted for Trump and maybe still support it. I have a next door neighbor who's a white evangelical Christian and a Trump voter and a truly good-hearted person. And mostly we talk about little day-to-day stuff, but we've had a lot of talks about faith and politics, and I think it's been good for both of us. And I've had the satisfaction of seeing her realize that nothing about Donald Trump is consistent with her values. She does see that now. It's also kind of a matter of protecting myself and our group. People like Josh who watch the right-wing media think anti-MAGA people are these screaming, hate-filled aliens. And I feel like if I'm willing to stand up and say, I'm one of those people you see protesting on the corner. And you might not agree with me, but I'm one of your neighbors. I think at that point it gets harder to believe the propaganda. Our encounter with Josh and his two buddies, I think actually left them kind of deflated because they weren't battling Antifa. They were standing there towering over people who looked like their moms. And he told me that when he got texts immediately afterward from other Trump fans saying, let's go back and do something, he was like, nah, no thanks. And we haven't had any follow-up. The final area I will mention is that the work we've done here with intersectional justice and anti-racism has really helped as I've moved into the activist sphere. And that's not because I've become the perfect anti-racist white person. In fact, it's kind of because I've realized that's not totally the point. In Gaston County, we have a core of activists, and most of them are Black, who have been fighting for justice for decades, and often with too little support. And now we have this influx of mostly white activists who are out about what Trump is doing. And the relationship between the two groups is fraught. I won't go into detail, but building alliances across those gaps has been challenging and rewarding. What I've learned from my work here is you got to have a lot of humility. Got to be aware that the things that are horrifying us now are things that people of color have been experiencing for a long time. I don't always need to set the agenda or jump into the spotlight. Sometimes we just have to show up and help where we're needed. And this is huge. I don't ask my Black colleagues to validate me. We can just do some of the work together and go from there. So where we are now on the local scene is we are fighting hard on two fronts. We have a school board member who posted a meme on Facebook that said, Islam is a satanic death cult. Allah is Satan. Muhammad is a false prophet. He's special. And we still have a Confederate monument towering on a pedestal in front of our courthouse. So what we have now is a multiracial coalition showing up to say neither one of those is acceptable. And it's rallying the folks who are not used to being challenged. At our last county commissioners meeting, a commissioner who is a member of Sons of Confederate Veterans asked that group to turn people out to share, quote, the real truthful facts about the monument. The facts were not that impressive. And the chairman showed his hand by inconsistently applying rules and trying to intimidate the folks who were speaking against the monument. Newsflash, it's not going to work. Tomorrow night, we will be at the school board meeting to call for accountability for the anti-Muslim board member. And the Christian nationalists who support him are planning to be there to counter-protest. So I would love to think that my persuasive words are going to resolve both of these issues in our favor. Nah, we won't win easily, and we may not win at all. I keep going back to a speech that the writer Christopher Armitage gave at an Indivisible Charlotte event a couple of months ago. He opened by saying, give up hope. And that's because hope puts your emotional well-being in the hands of outcomes you can't control. Commitment means you'll keep doing what's right, no matter how hard it gets, regardless of whether you ever see the results you want. And that's what I aspire to. Let me just end by saying, I really hope none of you think that I'm standing up here seeing myself as an activist sage dispensing wisdom, because, wow, that would be pretentious. When I was preparing this, I actually realized that I had circled around to being a lot like those UU teenagers that I envied so long ago. I'm starting to figure things out, and I have a supportive community who's willing to listen. So thank you for being that community. And I guess I will take your questions.
One thing, I wonder what your perspective would be on this. I feel that the UUCC is not a place that most Republicans would feel at home. Yeah. And honestly, that bothers me. It's not, as you said, you know, there's different perspectives, and we need to sort of honor and try to understand. If we're isolated and not open, we won't have a chance to find that common ground. I mean, I don't know. I just wonder, is it like a crazy thing?
I don't know what the answer is. One of my first friends here was Marsha Pepper, who some of you know her, and she was a Republican at the time, and she would make that case that, you know, you should not have to be politically liberal to be religiously liberal. She doesn't come here a lot now, and she is actually very anti-MAGA now, so. But we just, our most recent, right relations team, we did one of these community Sunday activities, and it was about diversity. And there was a guy who had visited, and I hate to say it, but I was looking at him going, he kind of doesn't look like, our typical person. He looked kind of MAGA. And he spoke up and said, you all talk about honoring diversity, but right now, one of the activities in the next room is making signs for no kings. And what if you aren't of that? And he said, I'm not MAGA. I think he was actually from Gaston County, which was a little disappointing. Stereotypes have a kernel of reality, but I don't know much about him. He visited, he felt a little bit put off by that. And I said, we don't have a political position, but we have, people do. And I said, it is true. We have a culture, and you might see a No Kings sign making event. You're not going to see a MAGA event here. And one of the people of color in that room spoke up and said, I think we need to go a little further with that we do not support groups and beliefs that make some of us feel unsafe. And the way that MAGA talks about so many types of people is unsafe. And so she made a really, we didn't part the skies and resolve this issue, but I loved it. To me, that was like the best one. And we've had several good discussions, and that was the best one because we really, looked beyond, we all accept everyone. I was like, that's tough when we really, really disagree on politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned being justified, that wasn't the word you used, by minorities. I don't understand that.
Validated. Yeah. I think there is a temptation to want to show everybody that, look, we have Black people on our side. Look, we had 2 women of color on our leadership team when we started. Amazing people, way more experience than any of us had with political organizing. And they were great and they were supportive. And they both withdrew because there was a lot of being affiliated with us created some real tensions for them and their community. And we remain friends. Every now and then one of them will call and we'll talk for like an hour, but we have people say, well, you've got an all-white leadership team. Yeah, we do. And the relationship with the NAACP has been challenging. And again, I've had to go to, there's not a Black monolith. Even within the very small subset of Black people who are progressively politically active in Gaston County, North Carolina, there's personalities. So with the NAACP, very arm's length with their president. Pretty good relationship with their vice president. Really good relationship with their education chair for obvious reasons. And so what we've had to kind of do is just say, we don't need you to, endorse us, declare a formal partnership. There's been a lot of reluctance to in any way formally partner with or associate with Indivisible Gaston, although we're not all white. We do have, but Gaston County is majority white. We're majority white. And it's just been kind of like when the Sons of Confederate Veterans decided that they were going to hold their Confederate Flag Day at our courthouse in front of their beautiful monument. Actually, one of my contacts from Charlotte texted me a picture and said, do you know about this? And the first people I shared it with was our leadership team. And the next was 4 individuals in the Black community that I have a personal relationship with. And we've kind of got that, sort of symbiosis going. And I sent it to them and said, what do you think about this? Do we need to do anything? And then I had to be patient, which is really, really hard for me because I got basically acknowledgement. They're like, wow, this is, and they said, do you know who's doing it? And I found a little more. It's like Sons of Confederate Veterans. And for 24 to 48 hours, I would just get these little pings that told me that it was being circulated because some of my white activist friends in Gaston County would send me clearly my own screenshots and say, oh my gosh, do you know about this? And then one of the longtime Black activists said, I think we need to go back. I think we need to go to their Confederate Flag Day rally. And I think we need to have a presence and we need to bring our own flags and signs. And so at that point, we're like, great, how can we help? And the leadership team, we'd all kind of been sitting there going, is this our issue to take on? But we decided we could follow this guy. And oh my God, Peg Argent is the person you want if you have to deal with a sheriff's department that you have ticked off by encouraging people to vote, unaffiliated people to vote in the Republican primary against him because he is super MAGA. And so we got a very different reception than we have for our pop-ups. They had set the Confederates all up in front of the monument, and they had their speakers, and it was all fine and good. And we walked up, and some of us were black and some of us were white, and they're like, "You need to go over there." And Peg was just like, "No, actually, they said this is a public event, so here we are." And we just marched right on in there. And so that's what I mean. It's like nobody has stood up. Actually, Scotty, the main guy, did speak at our No King's Day, which we really love. But you just have to take it kind of slow. You can't be like, "I want you to, be on my board of directors and tell everybody that Andos Helms is a wonderful ally." So it's like, maybe sometimes they work with me and sometimes they don't. Yeah.
So based on, all the recent events and all, the journalist in you has got to have been cringing with the way the news is being attacked and journalists being attacked. And I gotta say, they're not totally innocent, the decline in ethics, that they haven't stood up for each other as well. And I think we can in part blame NBC for creating this illusion that he's a great businessman, knowing the book was ghostwritten, yet they created The Apprentice that made him a household name. What's you gotta cringe at that. What's some of your response to that, all of that?
I think most independent journalists are still out there trying to do a really good job, sometimes in spite of the owners of their outlets. And this has been a long, slow process. Nothing about Donald Trump just sprang up with him. It had been, and we had been seeing this with, kind of starting with the Rush Limbaugh era, the mainstream media, don't trust them, and trust us. And, so it was getting harder and harder. I'd always felt like I could talk to people and judge them based on not their party affiliation, but their intelligence, their integrity, and accessibility, basically, and ability to do the job. But Republicans that I hadn't been able to relate to, it kind of became a thing that, we don't talk to the Charlotte Observer, or we don't talk to WFAE. And doing even something as simple as a voter guide. These people are running for local office. We will ask them to fill out their own information and present it to you. It got really hard to get Republicans to even participate in that. And that's why it's really hard to find good voter guides now. So, and of course, all of these political attacks coincided with the economic undermining of so many, newspapers were the powerhouses they were because they had basically a monopoly on local advertising and charged a lot for it. So you were paying pennies on the dollar for your subscription back in the day when, you got it tossed on your porch maybe twice a day in the old days. And that's gone. So I love doing it. I am proud that I was there for what in hindsight was the heyday of journalism, of local journalism and newspaper journalism. But FAE has had to kind of fight for its financial standing. The Charlotte Observer doesn't even have a physical newsroom now. I'm not sure it's much bigger than that Gastonia Bureau was when they hired me. So it's tough. I do not have the answer. Questions? Are we out of time? Who's keeping our time? Who's going to put me off the stage when it's done? Do we have any Zoom questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
You mentioned, you don't, the hope part, you don't want to focus on that. What is your vision for what may proceed with Gastonian politics and just in general?
Well, I think that ironically, the one thing we have done is give a lot of people hope that, if you're in Gaston County and you're used to thinking, almost all of our elected officials are Republicans and the culture is very red. And so when people see us standing out on street corners, almost every time we get somebody that pulls over and it's just like, "Oh my gosh, this means so much to me." We had a Latino family that, and the mom said, I grew up here and I know this stuff happens over in Charlotte. I can't believe I'm seeing this in my home county. And her kids were with her, 3 little kids, and they were out, they grabbed signs, and you would have thought they'd gotten tickets to see their favorite rock star. Just this past yesterday, Latino guy in a truck jumps out, has a big old thing of bottled water, hands it to us, bumps a couple of fists, gets back in his car just in time for the light to change. So there's always people that are like, yes, there are people like us. We want to see that translate to some election victories. We're going to try really hard in this election. We have school board members who are up, and for the first time ever, I don't know if you're familiar with this whole dynamic where in red counties, the local legislators are getting them to switch school board elections from nonpartisan to partisan. So we had primaries, and people will see an R and a D, and a lot of people in Gaston County are going to vote for an R. We have a couple of really good D candidates that I would love to see win. The guy that posted the, Allah's, that Satan has a very weak Democratic contender. So I don't know if we're going to, but yeah, there's part of me that wants to say they're going to take down that monument and replace it with something better. And they're going to censure this guy for what he said. And, and then we're all going to support public schools and we're going to see funding increase and all that. And it's like, yeah, these problems are not easy. Yeah.
I'm wanting to say something here from Zoom.
Hey, Karen.
Hi, Ann.
Karen was one of our guests and you used for quite a while.
Yes, and I'm just having left Gaston. I'm so glad to see what you and Indivisible is doing there. It makes me feel I almost miss being in the fight over there at Gaston. But I'm hoping that your talk is most inspiring to me, and I hope more people will consider becoming Indivisible folks and get out on our street corners here in Charlotte, because it feels so good to be having this relationship with the people that drive by and say hi and are so glad for it. So I just wanted to put a plug for Indivisible, and I want to keep doing what I can to help with that statue there in Gaston County. We got to keep that ongoing. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Yeah, people think of Indivisible as the people who protest. And, that's a good way to have visibility. But we also have a lot of other roles. We have people who, are doing letter writing and postcards. I don't know if any of y'all know Beverly Ellis, who's a longtime member here.
Yep.
Lived in Charlotte, moved to Belmont. She is like, I am never going to stand on a street corner with a sign, but I like to make signs, and she's really good at it. So we have these beautiful signs that she'll just come over and drop us a sign. So there's a way you can get involved. I think it's kind of fun to stand on the street corners, but it's not for everybody. Yes, Joe.
You know more about the mechanics of elections than I do. What safeguards are in place to assure that we have a fair election in November?
Oh, I wish I had the answer to that. I mean, I think the only thing that I can say is vigilance from a lot of people. I mean, I finally signed up to be a poll worker in Gaston County, which is going to be the least glamorous thing ever, and it's going to take all day. And, but I just feel like we need to have a lot of us there. So far, Trump has done a lot of bluster, but he hasn't done the full on, police in all the streets. And he's going to start, I think, one city at a time or a few cities at a time. I don't think Gaston County is going to be, that's kind of the good thing about being a red county is they're not coming after us first, So we just kind of get to watch Charlotte and say, let's do it.
I'm concerned about Musk and those computer geeks that could get into the vote results and change that electronically in a way that's difficult to track. Is paper ballots going to be enough to keep the elections honest?
I truly don't know. I am not good at that kind of stuff, but I will say I have said for quite a while that I think the digital attacks are going to be worse than the physical attacks. And not that the physical attacks are not real, but somebody could come grab me and drag me off to jail. I think it's much more likely that if you get targeted, and it could be by the actual government or it could be by some, solo person out there that they can hack and destroy and, make your life really miserable virtually. And I think the same is true of the elections. And plus, now nobody trusts the elections. Trump has told all the right wingers not to trust it. And I think the left is now skeptical because we think Trump's going to mess with it. So he is really, really effective at sowing chaos and distrust. And that ultimately helps the fascist government. Or somebody, yeah, Marge.
I've attended programs put on by a nonprofit. I can't remember the name of it, but it was addressing your question. And I know in Mecklenburg, none of the voting machines are connected to the internet, so they're not hackable, and we get a printed receipt to, to check our vote. And I imagine that is copied in, the on-site information, but the Board of Elections, has taken really good measures, at least here in Mecklenburg County in North Carolina, I think, to protect our votes, but
We have impressed, it feels like most of our elections boards have been professional. Now, I don't know if they're getting, now stuck with royalists and hacks,
but we have to make sure that the federal doesn't take any control of elections, because that keeps it, safer to have it.
which is ironic because we all remember when it was the Republicans saying no federal overreach, and now they want to overreach when it's. Yes.
I mean, just on that topic, Kelly is working on putting together something encouraging people here to be poll workers and be part of the process. I've been doing it for over 10 years in Charlotte. And I think it's a really important process. I mean, we swear on the Constitution in the morning to run a fair election. And you oversee that, of seeing that, and there are people that try to do things of, nobody else can go in that voting booth without your permission with you. There's a lot of rules with it. It's the attacks on voters have become so bad, aggressive, whatever you want to call it. We have to be trained before every election. I just trained it for the last primary. Before November, I'm going to have to go back out, Tuckasegee, to the facility to do another training class. And my chief judge works to get me in at night so I don't have to take time off from work to do it. So I got to be trained again for this election, because God only knows what they're going to try to change with the rules, and I'm sorry, love you, your use, but you got to be more proactive and less reactive. The reason there's voter ID is they put us on the ballot in 2018. It's in between the presidential years when nobody shows up. Okay. And then it's passed as law. Now you want to try to turn the law around. That's going to be harder to do than if 4 voters had showed up and voted it down. And when we have these discussions, you talk about voting, and I had somebody here ask, should I vote in the primary? We need to get out and vote in every election, in every primary right now. It's not a question of convenience or should I? Yes, you should, every election. Because that's when it happens. You know how many people show up at the local election? We have like 10% of the voters show up to vote for mayor and city council seats and school board seats.
Right.
And school board seats, the future generation.
And this
Percent of the
county are
voters.
really informed out of those who show up at the polls, because I have had people show up and they don't know who's on the school board. They want the mayor to fix the schools. It's like,
Or the pot,
Not
or,
that works,
or
yeah.
the present pothole in our street. I mean, that's another thing.
and that's the reality, is people like no kings, there's a big crowd, and it's like, but then you tell them, oh, you have to pay attention to a school board budget. That doesn't sound too sexy.
The Democrats who stayed home are just as responsible for electing Donald Trump than the Republicans and people who bought the propaganda and showed up for it.
Do I see people signaling that we need to do we have time?
Voter apathy is it's just the biggest problem in this country that I see. You're letting the majority of people or a minority choose for you when you stay home.
And Mecklenburg County has the people power in the Democrats to change the state elections. And Mecklenburg County Democrats don't vote. That's the problem.
Thank you. Yes.
Tom, one more quick one.
Do you have any comment on the funding shortage in Gaston County, the school board?
It's very frustrating because Gaston County is going through the same thing that Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and all the other counties are, which is that there really is not enough money. The General Assembly has not funded it well. Our county has not funded it well, but they screwed up. I mean, basically they had, and this is twice in a row that they've been dealt a bad hand and then played it badly. You know, they were the pioneers for this payroll system. It would have been tough under any circumstances. The district really botched it. And so we had like more than a year of people not getting paid accurately. So that did not help with teacher recruitment. And then they finally kind of got past that, got a new superintendent, kept the old chief financial officer. And he apparently did not account for the fact that federal money for positions was going away. So he just kind of was like, we can cover it with county money, but he didn't really account for it. So it's just making, and again, this is the frustration. I'm going to go there Monday and say, you don't get a pass on bigotry because you've got important work in front of you, but man, we want to be here supporting you on a lot of big things. And you're distracting us by posting silly culture war stuff.
Could you say anything? Could I say one other thing? And do you have any comments on our ongoing coming of age work here at the church?
I'm not that familiar with it. I know it is still going on. Nobody's asked me to be a mentor in a while, so I have not done anything. But I
Okay,
love the program.
thank you.
Should we call it an end?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you.